I'm finally back after BlizzCon, jet-lagged and kind of blown away, to be honest. I think this was the best BlizzCon for die-hard PvP Overwatch fans that we've ever had. Not only were the announcements for the next years of content looking good, there's been some major bombshells of information on the difference of management structure that we can look forward to thanks to the Microsoft acquisition. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Bobby Kotick is done at the end of the year. So looking forward, Blizzard is going to have some massive differences according to Mike Ybarra, but also the actions they've done so far. In an IGN interview with Aaron Keller, he talked about the new transparency that we can come to expect from Overwatch 2. Now I'll push back against him a little bit, because they didn't talk about PvE, they were pretty vague about that, and weren't overly transparent about the monetization changes, but all the things they did have to say were very, very good, and a step beyond what we're used to getting clued into. This is a super important transition, guys, because the prior PR marketing strategy by the helm of the Bobby Kotick playbook was to hold on to things and use them strategically. That strategy ultimately backfired, of course, when the lawsuits kept piling up and Bobby couldn't deflect from a bad news story because there's always a bigger one around the corner anyway. So now I think we're seeing the Overwatch devs in their final form. Prior to this, there was a very awkward transition where they were kind of like rushing to complete other devs' work, making a new vision for the game, still trying to service and salvage from the old work. Now we've kind of shed that. We know what Overwatch 2 is. They're putting it front and center that it's a die-hard PvP game. Here's all the content that's coming to it and how we're committing to the most important aspects of the game. Competitive longevity and reward systems being front and center to that, but also content. We have never before seen so far ahead in the things that are working in development. So yes, the transparency is an upgrade, and I certainly look forward to that. But more importantly is the switch to how they're monetizing the content. The content I felt was already good with Overwatch 2. It's just the reputation of how exploitative it felt that I think they need to change, and it looks like they're doing that. At the What's Next panel, for example, they said one of the improvements they're going to make to the Battle Pass is allowing you to pick your mythic skin, which is especially important if you missed earlier seasons, and maybe don't play the hero of the newest mythic skin. That's a major problem that Overwatch has had to deal with transferring into the free-to-play model, where there isn't uniform cosmetics that make sense across all the characters, and they keep adding more. Each player has a different hero pool, and it's not like everyone's got the same gun like they do in Valorant, or all the character models are effectively just cosmetics like in Fortnite. So I'm not going to read too much into it, but I think even going that far and announcing that is that they're aware of that problem. That if you don't have agency in selecting what you want, it can feel unrewarding if you only play certain heroes and just have to wait for the rotation of a reward to come that's for you. Of course, I'll remind that over time, they were able to rework the loot box system to give you exactly that, but it also reworked it into being a non-viable product in terms of making the game money anymore. So they went too far in the other direction to make sure that they can have continuous monetization. But it sounds like in the next year with an overhaul, we might get ourselves to a place where the player base is more happy to the way the game is monetized. And you might say, well, that's not enough information. But Mike Ybarra, the lead of Blizzard, had some bombshell quotes that are even a step above just these little promises. Here's their new philosophy on their monetization of content delivery in general across all their games. So here he's acknowledging that players want new content like almost every single day, but at the same time, it takes large teams to be able to deliver that. So you have to monetize it in the right ways. But at the same time, I always tell the teams, he says, when someone spends $1 or a penny with Blizzard, I want them to feel good after they do that. How do we get to a world where we know that's always going to be the basis of what we're doing? We want to serve players with more content in our universes. At the same time, we want to make sure we're responsible and meet their expectations. And here's the killer one. This is a massive difference to the way Bobby Kotick ran things or wanted to run them. Blizzard execs do remain open to proposals that aren't live services. Ybarra commented, be it a 4-hour experience or a 400-hour experience, nor are they afraid to create new IPs to turn models upside down. And in this interview, they talk more about Diablo because that's the one that I think more clearly has expectations built for it, because us on the Overwatch side, we now know it's just a PvP game, live service game. The things we should expect, they said at the conference, with a big question mark over will there be more PvE content? And of course, I don't necessarily even need more Archives Minus in my life, but I have to think that due to the reception, poor Steam reviews, and probably the sales numbers even, they might be reevaluating even that. Diablo, on the other hand, seemingly isn't rushing out the next expansion. They're kind of getting their ducks in a row with the main game first, then going to release the expansion at the end of next year. I get the similar vibe from Overwatch as well, that they're focusing on improving the game experience in some of the most important aspects. BlizzCon for me, as an Overwatch fan, was just a long list of like wish list items getting checked off. I was kind of blown away by like how good it was. In another article by Jason Schreier, Ybarra talks about the independence of the different Blizzard teams. Contrasting to the relationship it seems they have with Phil Spencer of Microsoft, he goes to Phil and says, "Hey, can we do this?" I think he would look at me and go, "Run your studio," which is very different to the way things worked with Bobby Kotick, where Ybarra says in the 2 years he's been in charge, Ybarra had to run many decisions up the chain of executives at Activision, slowing everything down. And I think he's even being a bit kind about it here, because we already know that Bobby Kotick kind of gave the Overwatch team specifically a runaround, where he would demand certain things, have them work on it for a while, then scrap it entirely on a whim. So not only did they have to clear things through him, he would run them in circles, and that's where a lot of the development went to waste. Whereas now we're finally seeing this new era of Blizzard. Ybarra said this in the opening ceremony as well, and I'll admit, at the conference, the energy levels of a lot of the announcements from our lovely developers across the different games, it wasn't at rockstar status like it used to be back in the day in other BlizzCons. The energy levels from the crowd, as well as the presenters, was muted. It felt like gamer nerds talking on stage, okay? Whereas in previous years, it felt like a rock and roll concert. Lights and explosions, and here's a new game, redefine the sequel, like over-ambitious expectations, right? This was more low-key. But I think it's what we need right now as Blizzard fans. After so many blunders, after so many mistakes, now Ybarra gets on there and says, yeah, we've made some mistakes, but now we're going to kind of reclaim what Blizzard is. Rephrasing kind of what he said there. But that was like the gist of it. The company in personnel is so entirely different now, but it really feels like we're at the start of the come up, as it seems like they're empowering the right strategy and right management for their different games. So all that more or less was saying the right things, but I think it also explains why they were so transparent for Overwatch specifically this year. So I want to talk a little bit more about the dedicated content we're getting and have some expanded thoughts on it. And we know everything that's coming next year already. Just about. The biggest things are the 3 new heroes. One of them we got to play on the weekend, Mauga, is super fun. And we know the other 2 sound like they have more transformative gameplay playstyles. One goes underground, one goes in the sky. They're kind of churning these heroes out. And I think, honestly, as you start to add up the hero mechanics we have in Overwatch 2, like think of all of them they've added. Are any of them not fun? Because we had some dud heroes from Overwatch 1. I'll be honest, Orisa, Moira, at launch, not very good. Kind of resident sleeper mechanics, to be honest. And obviously the whole Brig situation is a whole nother ball of wax. Whereas, yes, I will level with you that balancing is always going to be a concern, whether things are too weak or too strong in Overwatch 2. The mechanics of the gameplay has always been fun to me. Things have been broken, but the characters themselves have been fun. Like, has anyone been locked in a jail cell to play an unfun character other than maybe when you had to play Orisa? Like, the tank rolls catching some L's along the way, and I think people really undervalue that with their rose-tinted glasses looking back to Overwatch 1, where objectively speaking, the hero designs had less in them. Your characters did less things. And the superhero heroes we get in Overwatch 2 would definitely have broken 6v6, without a doubt. They already were beginning to in the later heroes that did have more complex mechanics, needing to try to figure out how to make a character like Sig, Echo, or Brigitte before them not break the entire game. And they did, in their own way, at different skill tiers, right? That doesn't happen in Overwatch 2. It hasn't happened. Things break at the highest tier, but the vast majority of time I've spent playing this game this year, lots of characters have been viable through the ranks, which was just not the case in Overwatch 1. And every time there's a balancing setback, they have corrected it. And I think the new game modes and map reworks are slowly starting to build up over time as well. And especially for a new player or a returning one from Overwatch 1 to 2, you may have been unimpressed with how much content was in it. But by the time next year that we start churning out even more heroes, maps, and modes, it's a pretty packed game. Mauga is going to be hero 39, and by the end we'll have 41. These are the hero numbers that a lot of people brought up that we would need before we started to consider hero bans, which on the recent Group Up podcast, I went ahead and said a prediction that I think we will be getting them, or at least discussion of them next year. That's a conversation for another day. The biggest improvement of all, I think, for my money, is the ranked improvements. I said the best for last here. Basically, everything that was in the SK video, and the top issues that pretty much everyone in the community had, they addressed, where the ranked feedback you get is going to be more transparent than ever. You know exactly how your meter is going up and down. They'll be doing yearly ranked resets, which I think is important to incentivize players to feel like they can get a fresh start, especially after so many things change. The way you play Overwatch from one year to the next transforms a lot. If you stop playing at launch and then all of a sudden now Bastion's like a really good character, that's a whole new experience, right? Among many other things, of course. And the big personal buff to me is the new wide matchmaking. Most grouping restrictions will be going away, which will remove the necessity to have a Smurf account to play with your friends. People will still do it. I mean, it's a free-to-play game anyway, but it is annoying to do that because you won't have all the heroes unlocked on a new account. And I actually think this is going to be so much better than some people think. Players are really worried about rank discrepancy in their games, but the truth of the matter of Overwatch is, even with really close and accurate matchmaking, the best they can do, the best that any system could do, there's still steamrolls, there's still counterpicking, you still get blown out, and most of the reason isn't the skill of the players, in my opinion, it's the matchups. If your team in general doesn't know how to counter something the enemy has, or you just don't have it in your hero pool, or players don't want to swap, those things already make the game really haphazard, snowbally, and brutal, and players that wanted to group already did it on Smurfs anyway, so it's not going to be a big night and day difference. You've already experienced this matchmaking, especially if you've done group queue to begin with, because we already had a split queue system where it tried to pair groups against groups. Now, it'll let you do that more easily, but also try to make the solo queue experience more close in matchmaking, because they're widening up the rest of the matchmaking, if that makes sense. So I think sometimes solos have to be getting into those wide matchmaking groups just to populate the lobby. It won't be the majority of your experience, and you'll know you're in one because it's going to say at the start of the match. And the thing that you have to understand and realize about that kind of game is it's closer to quick play in terms of how you play it. Matchmaking that I actually prefer. I think the game plays more fun this way. Let's just put like the most competitive integrity for a kind of casual, wacky game aside for a moment. When the matchmaking isn't perfect, there's more matchups in the game that are weaker for you to exploit. So while you might have a teammate that's running it down, the enemy will have weak points for you to shine against. With tighter matchmaking, the meta becomes more about covering each other's bases, and I think it's actually more brutal to have the right team comp, because if everyone is similar skill and their comp functions and yours almost does but not quite, that gameplay feels brutal, and that's tight matchmaking, right? Whereas with wider matchmaking, your skill expression can actually matter more, while also the score lines you may expect to be even more severe. Yes, there is a world where your tank is hard gapped by the enemy's tank, but we've got so many heroes in the game now that the playstyles and options you have to contribute are so wide and diverse. Not only is there a lot of heroes, a lot of them are viable at the same time. You can complain about the state of the balance, like which heroes are in play, how strong supports are, for example, but I think it would be widely inaccurate to say that the game is unbalanced in terms of there's a lot of useless heroes that can't be picked. That's not true at all, actually. If I look at the hero roster, I can make an argument for a situation that I have seen that hero get utilized very well in my last couple weeks of grinding the game. I've been playing an outrageous amount, honestly. And while there is a tier list to that, the game's balanced as far as Overwatch can be, especially after they tuned back a lot of the more forgiving heroes, which are still good, but not like outwardly dominating everything. And then more importantly, with matchups being so important to the game, playing with your friends and setting up the types of playstyles you want to play is everything. I really think there's a chance that the community atmosphere of this game gets a big buff that players just don't seem to really be seeing. Like, a lot of people are worried about the downsides of wide matchmaking, but let's think of something in Overwatch. One of the most popular content series that loads of streamers have done is exactly the type of gameplay that you'll see from wide matchmaking, and that is rank disparity content. You think you're stuck in your rank? You think you're as good as that tank player that's 3 ranks above you? Well, you will now get a chance to prove that. Whereas in the previous ranked matchmaker, the way I would advise the easiest way to rank up is to learn how that rank plays the game and lean into that. I've learned so many things from either smurfing or playing the game over years, watching unranked GMs, whereas on one hand, having better mechanics, executing your plays is always going to help you dominate the lobby. There's also an incredibly important component of just playing around the way your team wants to play, especially on the types of characters that don't have the highest degree of skill expression. The more your character's about headshots, you can focus on that, but the more utility or teamwork dependent your hero is, the better you have to understand how your teammates play. And that can be incredibly frustrating for players, because if you don't master that, and if you don't master their plat tactics, let's say, even though they're bad plays that you need to synergize with in order to win the game, you can really be in for a hard time. And I think a lot of players run into that brick wall. Whereas, however you think the game should be played, you can do that with your friends, even if you are at a rank disparity. Because in my opinion, the game should focus on fun and playability first, as opposed to fair matchmaking, quote unquote. I've talked about this for years. So to have Blizzard take a massive 180 on this, I could not be more thrilled. And I'm aware that players will complain about this, but they complain about everything, unless they're winning. They don't want to take responsibility for their own gameplay, their own hero pool, their own plays. It's always someone else's fault, including the matchmaker, which I'm so thankful that we're no longer having that year-long discussion of trying to perfect the matchmaker. Like, that's going to fix just the function of how Overwatch works, which, especially as they have powered up a lot of aspects of the game, particularly the support kit, is much more about counter-comping and counter-picking. For a while there, it was more about counter-picking the tank, which still is important, but now there's extra layers of strategy where the support counter-picking especially, and the utility DPS counter-picking is at the highest value I can actually think Overwatch has ever seen. Because prior to that, for the last 7 years or so, there's been more dominant heroes that fit all situations. The game is chaotic enough, and there's enough viable styles that you can't really commit to the top ones. And that makes the game very, very fun, in my opinion. I can see better versions of Overwatch down the line or in alternate realities, but for the one that they're trying to design, they're making this version of the game about as well as they can. I'd rather maybe have like a draft mode with each team having their own hero roster, limiting the number of swaps, but I don't personally need that because I play a lot of different heroes across all 3 roles. And I can't really think of another option they could go down to have the format they have and make everybody happy, or at least everyone not unhappy all the time. You don't really have any throw picks, just situational ones, which makes the game really good now, and looking to the future as they keep adding heroes, I think that just improves. The archetypes of poke, rush, and dive play out kind of severely in Overwatch 2, where if the wrong components aren't situated in the Jenga tower correctly, everything falls down. Then all of a sudden you build it up and your team becomes a fortress until the enemy counters you. And this is what makes me love the game, but I always felt it was underserviced by matchmaking, because any of the things I'm about to explain only apply when your team coordinates or is willing to swap, which is easier to do if you're in a pre-made. A character like Brig is weak to either rush or poke, strong versus dive. And the moment in this game when we switched off of that type of character to Mercy, who can fly away continuously and dodge and can get value by playing defensively, well, now I had a support later in the fight, and not only that, I get my value amplified. I was already getting picks in this game, I just needed my team to be able to survive and parry back. Because, well, hit scan on New Queen Street is pretty darn meta. One of the best soldier maps in the game, in my opinion. And against Rush, poke characters want to do 2 things. Apply pressure before it comes in and dodge when it does come in. Because once the speed boost and Queen Shout is down, your comp is much stronger. But if you can't outlast that and you die, then they win. It's pretty simple. And a shieldless rush comp is weak to poke damage of any kind, any ranged character, but the most reliable one is Soldier. Now, you might say to yourself, well, it'd be even more reliable if your aim was as good as Metro's Soldier, who plays thousands of hours of Overwatch Kovacs in his career. So yeah, you may sit there and say, I just wish my Soldier player in this new Queen Street game was higher rated. I wish I had Metro instead of Frito. But no, you're in the game with me in the current system. We have what we have. And maybe with more headshots, I could overcome my teammate being at a matchup disadvantage. I tried, but I don't think we should focus on winning or losing. I think what's important to the fun factor of Overwatch is having a playable experience, and the more your team is on picks that are just going to get destroyed by the enemies, Overwatch becomes less playable. So playing with friends will always, in theory, be even more playable. So incentivizing that in any way, I look forward to. Because I think a culture around playing with friends in this game could start. Because it's so much more fun than playing with randoms. Unless you have a masochistic dedication to becoming better. And what I hope is, now that we're deemed to be more of a hardcore PvP experience. I mean, Aaron Keller said this in the IGN interview, where in Overwatch 1, they wanted it to be friendly. So that's where we got a lot of these resident sleeper easy mode heroes that were just designed to exist and counter an entire strategy. Now everything requires mechanics to do. Even the easiest characters, you need to have your matchup knowledge, land your plays, and even, let's say, the lowest skill characters have had their skill amplified somehow, whether it be with movement or other creative ways you have to play. For example, if you've watched all the gameplay in the background, Reaper has been a major hero. On Midtown, I went 36-6, but the enemy Reaper started to counter me, and there's other mistakes in there too, over-ulting, etc. We always can improve individually, but from a macro strategy standpoint, we didn't have a mark for Reaper. Then on Shambali, we ran it ourselves and hard dominated. Now in this game, I pick Reaper for two reasons. We have Zarya and Lucio. Lucio is considered a very bad pick, so is Reaper. But because the enemy start off on Bastion, Reaper actually, despite being one of the worst characters in the game, has a pretty good matchup against Bastion. And if the enemy doesn't headshot me and burst me down, I have the tool set to Wraith his transform and have the close range damage to burst him. So badly that playing Reaper well, a character everyone kind of agrees is one of the worst characters in the game, forced the enemy to swap off the Bastion, which is considered one of the most reliable characters in the game. So how are you going to find a game with this many heroes where that kind of matchup exists? The only thing I can think of is like a fighting game with lots of characters in it. And if you really understand your matchups, you can take them quite far. This is what I mean, and I think the community really doesn't understand this at all. The only counters people seem to understand is the tank counters, and I've been trying to scream this from a mountain, but the game is just so much more beyond, oh, Zarya can shoot at D.Va through her matrix. Like, it's so much more complicated than that. The interconnectivity of the team comps matters so much, and they did this intentionally because so many players asked for it. At the launch of the game, it was much more dive-centric, classic FPS. Cassidy, Genji, Sojourn were dominating. Now, supports dominate, but I think above that is team comps and coordination. Like, teamwork is really back in a big way in Overwatch 2, while also having as much individual skill expression as you can imagine. It's just that there's a lot of defenses that slow that down nowadays. So you do have to outplay lots of abilities, but I really ask the community, like, widely. You didn't like the first version of the game. They changed it to this version. They've balanced this version, and people still complain. Like, I don't know how anyone will ever be happy. But what I do know is I'm fairly happy with how it's working. And when you combined everything that we've covered in today's video, balance, rank fixes, dedication to the actual game we have, lots of more content, a lot of it looking good. They just seem to get better at making new interesting heroes, new maps, and new modes now, each one better than the last. Under the new management with Microsoft going into the next year, the team's individual agency of how they want to run the game is actualized. I feel like our devs are empowered to be themselves and do the things they want to do, as opposed to following directions from up on high. That's the impression I get from Blizzcon and interviews and all the devs talking in their respective fields. We're not trying to make Overwatch into a game it isn't anymore, which is why I would even be okay with them just fully canceling all PvE attempts, but we'll have to see. I don't think they're going to do that, but I also wouldn't be surprised. I bet they try to lower the scope of it and try to make it truly Archives Plus, as opposed to redefine the sequel and not meet those expectations. That seems much more in line with what the producer, Jared Nuss, or is it Ness? I don't know. Aaron Keller can't say his name either, so I don't feel bad about it anymore. Noose, is it? That's the way he seems to make decisions. And you combine that with Blizzard, Mike Ybarra, seemingly able to allow his teams to run the way they want to, we're no longer going to be engineering this game to simply be a cash asset flip. Because let's be honest, that's straight up what they did in a lot of cases. They said, how can we take what we already have worked on and make the most money immediately by putting a 2 on the game? They did also put a lot of work into it, but that's the first iteration of what Overwatch 2 was. A handful of new content, but mostly a massive monetization overhaul. But now going into 2024, those monetization things are looking to change, and I'm starting to feel like we're getting an overwhelming amount of content. Once we have 3 new modes and 41 plus heroes, we're just talking about a completely different kind of game in the scope, scale, and dedication Blizzard has put through to Overwatch 2. And with that much content, I think the critical aspect of it being free to play with free to play monetization starts to not feel so severe as we create more distance from the Overwatch 1 business model into Overwatch 2. There's just so much evidence of them really working on this game well that I think the reputation is going to start to change, especially if you can just get on, play with your friends, and run the heroes and strategies you like. I mean, what else could you want as a hardcore PvP player? Honestly, tournament mode, hero bans, I don't even know if I feel the game absolutely needs it as long as you play a lot of heroes. I'm running out of things to ask for, and when that's the case, the game's gotta be considered good, right? Guys, that's everything for today's video. Let me know your thoughts on everything in the comment section down below. I think Overwatch 2 is on the best direction I could imagine it be on at this stage. If you liked the video, please be sure to leave it a like. And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.